Good morning, everyone. We are just going to give it one more minute as we let all the attendees into the Teams meeting. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are continuing to let folks into the Teams meeting, so that will continue. And then I would just like to introduce myself. My name is Sophie Leininger. I work as the Government Relations Director with the Office of Cannabis Management, and I'm joined by my colleague Eric Taubel, our General Counsel for the Office of Cannabis Management, as well as two panelists who we will be talking with during the second half of this webinar, Angie Berg from Stearns County and Angie Wiese from St. Paul. So we're very excited that you all can join us this morning. This webinar, similar to webinars that the office has planned and presented before, is designed to provide information and guidance about Minnesota Chapter 342, which is our adult use cannabis legislation in Minnesota. And so this webinar is specifically designed for guidance for local governments who are incredibly important partners for the licensing and regulatory framework as we set out on implementing adult use cannabis in Minnesota. So with that, thank you all for those who continue to join. We will get started. So for those that are just catching up, Chapter 342, it was signed into law in 2023. It established the Office of Cannabis Management then and legalized adult use cannabis in Minnesota. We have since then updated this chapter via several statutory changes this past legislative session. The lens for this framework was really focused on implementation and how the new office, as we stood up both a brand new office and the regulatory framework, could do it well. So overall, the office, as a state office, is charged with developing and implementing the operational and regulatory systems to oversee the adult use cannabis industry, the medical cannabis program, which has been operating for 10 years, and the consumer hemp industry for many of the retailers who sell the hemp-derived cannabinoid products right now. Overall, our mission and goal is to have an effective, safe, equitable, and sustained cannabis industry. So as we continue to implement and unpack Chapter 342, this continues to be our guiding framework as we continue to get closer to licensing. I want to start with the resources slide at the beginning and not the end. We have, over the last few months, continued to develop guidance and resources as we have added new staff, as we have learned new things. And so our new webpage, I've popped the URL up on the slide. If you've not checked out our new webpage, I really recommend it. We have lots of information both about 342 and how the licensing system is set up based on statute. Statute is really specific about license types, limits on those license types, and how they'll all work together, as well as the process for applications and licensing. So we also have a specific landing page designed specifically for local government partners like yourselves. So there is information there about the role of local governments. We also have information in this interim before we begin licensing. There is information about cannabis-related events because we have not distributed any cannabis event licenses yet because we are dependent on the rulemaking process, which we'll get into. But so there's guidance now for this interim period. And the same thing with the hemp-derived cannabinoid product retailers that many of you have in your communities. There's information on the website about what enforcement of these retailers looks like and information there so that you can continue to learn more. We also knew this summer have developed, as required by statute, a model ordinance for cannabis ordinances, and as well in coordination with a local government guidebook is what we've been calling it, to try to break down some of the pieces of Chapter 342 that are very specific to local governments. Section 342.13 and 342.22 in particular about the role local governments will play. So really recommend checking out these resources at the same time as you dissect Chapter 342. And as always, we are navigating this very new process. There's lots of questions. We have lots of good questions every day. We continue to receive questions, and we are developing a FAQ page. I think that grows from week to week. So please check that out on our website. There's a section specifically designed for local government questions. And I will say many of them have come from some of you on this call, and that is helping inform the guidance that we share. So 4 questions. We know this webinar is going to be a lot of information shared with you all, and we'd like you to have the opportunity to follow up with any questions that are prompted here or questions that you've been sorting through as you engage in this work. So our email, this is included on our website, but cannabis.info@state.mn.us. We have a new customer service team who is responsive to this line, and we work to provide answers back to the best of our ability, also knowing we cannot provide business advice and we cannot provide legal advice. So there are some areas where we cannot fully engage, but we can provide clarity about how we are implementing 342. Additional resources, I just want to give a huge shout out to the League of Minnesota Cities and the Association of Minnesota Counties for being very helpful partners as we have put together this model ordinance and local government guidebook, as well as the Planners Association. So continue to utilize the many already in place resources you all have as we continue to engage in this work together, as well as the Public Health Law Center and many more associations who I am likely forgetting in this space, but they have developed additional guidance and documents, and I think they all work together quite well. We'll get going into the next one, but I just wanted to reiterate, because I know that we can't cover everything in this hour together, but want to name where you can continue to find more information. So I'd want to orient with just a brief summary of the 2024 legislative session. So this past session, changes were made to the 342 and the cannabis law. So if you have not yet gone through and reviewed those changes, I would recommend it, because there are some significant changes to the way that the application and licensing process will work. We have moved in order to align with our implementation lens and also the goals that you see here on this slide. We had many goals this session for our legislation, and under one of them is to move from a points-based system to a vetted lottery-based system in order to remove subjectivity and embed fairness in the process. Along that line, we also have removed the requirement that a property or a premise be secured and established at the time of initial application, and instead move that requirement to later before licensure after initial vetting has been done. This is designed to further embed fairness and equity into the process, and also protect applicants from a massive financial risk and burden that securing a property with no assurance of a license poses. So additionally, we have priorities related to the medical program and prioritizing medical patients and continuity there, as well as consumer safety. And so I could do a whole webinar on the rest of that, but there's more information on our website about these. But for the sake of today, we want to hop in to the impact these changes have as it relates to the role of local governments. So timeline-wise, that's probably a really popular question as we think about where we're at in the process. So rulemaking, we are dependent on our rulemaking process as required in statute. So this is ongoing, and we are anticipating rules being complete in early 2025. We have shared a first draft of the rules. It is now available on our website for public feedback now through August 30th. Later this month. So this is a really important milestone for us as we continue to get closer to licensure, because licensure is, and the whole regulatory structure is dependent on these rules being adopted. As some of you may know, we will have an expedited complaint process as required in statute established as part of our licensing work. So more to come about what this looks like. In the interim, we have many channels of communication for you all to get in touch with our office, as well as a complaint form currently established on our office website. So the license pre-approval process. This is the process that is running before the rules are adopted. We are currently in the middle of that process, which is exciting. So social equity verification, where applicants were able to be verified for their social equity status, ran from June 24th through July 10th. There will be future windows for prospective applicants to be verified as for their social equity status. This was not the only opportunity. And then the license pre-approval application window is running right now. And this is a statutory requirement that this is the window, July 24th through August 12th. So this is where applicants who were verified as social equity applicants were able to submit their application for license pre-approval for 9 license types. From there, we need to review applications for the many statutory requirements that are included in 342, and then we will run a lottery selection process if there are more applicants than licenses available for pre-approval. And so I will note this is a pre-rules process, and so we are still in the midst of this, and it is also not the launch of the full licensing quite yet. We are anticipating that in 2025 in coordination with the adoption of rules. So there will be more social equity verification windows as well as the application windows to come for licensure. And I would also like to note that the compacting process continues with tribal nations. There's 11 tribal nations here in Minnesota, and those are individual dialogue between each tribal nation and the state of Minnesota on a government-to-government basis. And so this webinar is designed for partners at our city and our county and our townships. And so we will not fully get into the process that is occurring with tribal nations, but I did want to name that is also occurring. And as always, I think we say this in every webinar, we continue to build out our office. And so I think we grow exponentially. It feels like every week we continue to add staff, which is exciting, and really prioritizing our licensing and enforcement teams as we get into it, because those are many of the partners that you will work with as we think about the licensing framework and enforcement framework once licensees are up and running. So there have been many questions, I think, coming in, and I want to thank all the folks who have sent questions in to help inform what we cover today, because like I said, I think we can cover quite a bit. But some of the questions are around capped licenses, the lottery, and also which is allowed in state law, a local government unit's ability to limit retail registrations. So for how these work together, licenses are issued by OCM, so they will all be issued by OCM in that decision process. Local governments play a role in approval pieces along that decision tree, but licenses will come from OCM. During our pre-approval process, there will be 9 cannabis business license types available for people to receive, not a license, but a license pre-approval. And then all of these will be capped during this pre-approval process, meaning statute has a limit on how many license pre-approvals OCM will issue. I'll get into what those look like next. But then when we launch general licensing, there are 13 total license types available. And this is an important note too for why it's important to review the changes this past session. Last year's law included 16 license types. There are now 13 license types. So both cannabis and hemp businesses. Once we launch general licensing, 4 of these license types are capped in statute, the retailer, manufacturer, cultivator, and mezzo business. So these 4 license types where there is a cap in statute would be subject to a vetted lottery if there are more applicants than licenses available. Then there are 9 license types that are uncapped. And so you'll note that those that may be capped during pre-approval are not capped in statute once we get into general licensing. The caps included in statute are in place until July 1, 2026, where at that time the office will have the authority to have discretion to assess the market and what is needed based on the first 2 years as we think about a minimally viable market as we launch and as we get this brand new industry up and running. And then, so this is what it looks like when we break it down by license type, both for license pre-approval and then when we launch general licensing. you'll see where I noted the 4 license types for general licensing are capped. I will note there is a 50-50 split in statute between licenses available for social equity applicants and licenses available for all applicants. For license pre-approval, we're only talking about social equity applicants. I also want to note the asterisks on the screen, and this is where it comes into play with a local governments who issues retail registrations for businesses, where their ability to limit businesses that have a retail registration come into play. So cannabis micro businesses, cannabis meso businesses, and cannabis retailers who engage in retail sales are required to have a local retail registration in addition to their license prior to engaging in retail sales. So that is where the option to limit exists. It is not a requirement. So I want to just note that as it relates to how the whole system works together. And then you'll see down at the bottom, lower potency hemp edible manufacturer and lower potency hemp edible retailer are what are known as our hemp businesses. So those are similar in the retail space to those existing right now, but are not yet licensed. All right, so the role of local governments. And so I want to note that this also aligns very closely with our guidebook that we have posted online. And also, as we continue to learn, as we continue to get feedback, we plan to issue any updated guidance as we need. So I just want to note that as well. So as you're following along, this is designed to go with that. But really, the role of the local governments is focused in major buckets, both with local ordinances. It is an option to do so, including based around zoning, time, place, and manner. And then also there, like I noted, there's a local approval piece that is a part of the state application and licensing process. So license types along the way are required to certify their compliance with zoning ordinances in the jurisdiction that they are looking to operate. So this is a required piece that local governments may certify or not certify if a business is meeting zoning ordinances along the way. As we just talked about, and Eric will get into more, retail registration is a role for local governments. I would highly recommend looking at 342.22, this section that lays out the specifics that are required, but also where there is discretion for local governments about how they may limit or not limit. There is also a specific local approval required for the event license type. And then in the case of cultivation prior to rules, which it would happen during pre-approval, specific local approval is required for this as well. So just noting the difference between the system at large and then when we have some exceptions. You'll find many exceptions and many ifs and whats as we get into this process. Additionally, compliance checks are required in state statute as part of 342.22 as part of that registration process. There were changes made to this section this past session as well, so please make sure to note what is required of those compliance checks now. And I think one that has become a popular question as well is the concept of municipal cannabis stores. Those are included in statute as an option for a municipal government to operate a retail location. So it's wordy and against all PowerPoint rules, but really this is the pre-approval steps. And so I wanted to put this up there, but I will also note it looks similar when we think about general licensing, but also different. So make sure to check out the guidebook as we also begin to prepare for general licensing, because terms change and also specifics may change, but the overall order of operations remains the same. So you'll note that we have done steps 1 for pre-approval. Social equity applicant status has been verified. And then they are completing applications currently and submitting application fees. And I will note application and licensing fees are really specific in statute. So those are required by state law. OCM will do that application vetting. If qualified, applicants will be entered into a lottery, and then if selected in the lottery, OCM will complete the background check of those selected applicants. And at that point, those that work through the background check process successfully will be issued license pre-approval. So for the vast majority of license types, license pre-approval is not a license and does not allow to engage in business operations, and instead is supposed to be an assurance of that pathway that allows folks to secure capital, secure property, work with the local government, you all, on the very important process of what it means to operate within your jurisdictions. I will note, you'll see at the bottom, there is an exception that cultivation prior to rules is an option for micro businesses, meso businesses, and cultivator license types who are ready and able to start. They would utilize the med rules instead of our adult use rules, which are underway, and specific local approval would be required. So more to come on that. We're not going to dive too deep into that in this webinar because that is still a little bit away in the process. Then you'll note the steps 7 through 11. This is dependent on the rulemaking process and timing wise, but really from there, once an applicant with license pre-approval is ready, updating their application based on their location and also working through the process with local governments to assure that they have met those zoning compliance pieces at that stage. And once we're ready with rules, OCM would forward the completed application to a local government. Local government would complete certification of zoning compliance. OCM would conduct that site inspection to make sure we're compliant on rules, and the license would become active. And as we've noted, for businesses engaging in retail sales are still also dependent on a local retail registration for that piece as well, in addition to the license. All right, so I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Eric, and he will tackle the next couple.
Hey everyone, as Sophie noted, my name's Eric. I'm the General Counsel for the Office of Cannabis Management. I think as you guys are preparing to enter into the cannabis space, as we start to get the license pre-approvals out and move towards a full market launch next year, Sophie mentioned them twice, but from a sort of operations standpoint, the parts of the statute that I think are going to be the absolute most helpful to each of you is 342.22, which deals with the local registration of retail stores, and then also 342.13, which deals with the local control elements of the statute. Of course, as you might expect, both of those statutes have some changes from the last session that hopefully will be updated on the reviser's website soon. In the context of the retail registration, those changes mostly relate to what Sophie talked about at the top, that we have streamlined some of the license types, so there's just fewer licenses, and that's all those changes reflect. 342.13 changes have a little bit of a more substantive change, which we'll probably touch on in a little bit. With respect to retail registration, anyone that wants to operate a retail location has to have a retail registration with the local unit of government where that store is going to be located. The sort of unit of government that wants to be the registrator can change. The statute does allow for a city or township that does not want to issue retail registrations to delegate that authority to the county. That's obviously an independent decision everyone will make on their own. But if you are the unit of government that has the authority to register, a couple of things that are probably worth noting. So first of all, one of the questions we've gotten a lot from people that are interested in operating retail stores, from people who work for cities and counties, and just people who are generally interested, is this question about the retail registration cap. And this is what the legislature included around having one retail registration per 12,500 residents. Importantly, this is not a requirement that you have one store per 12,500 residents, but rather that if you have, you must issue a registration if asked for each 12,500. So if you have a population of 12,501, you would be required to have the lowest you could cap your registrations at is two. And so as soon as you tick over, at 12,500 or at 25,001, at 37,501, each time you tick over by one person, you'll be required or obligated to issue that additional registration. Um, you don't have to seek out businesses, but if they come and are seeking it, you're not able to deny them based on the resident cap if you haven't added that extra store. There is a provision in the statute that if you're a city or township and your county already meets the county-wide resident numbers, that you can rely on the county-wide registrants to meet your requirements. So if you're a smaller city or township in a large county, for instance, if you're somewhere at the edge of Ramsey County, and St. Paul has so many retail registrants that it exceeds the 12,500, ratio for the county, you're no longer obligated to issue additional registrations, even if you don't have a cap. The other change, and this is the change that occurred this year, is the original cannabis legislation allowed that cities and towns or counties might open municipal cannabis stores. The legislature just made clear this year that if you have a municipal store, that doesn't count against your registration requirements. And so if you were a town of, say, 10,000 and you opened a municipal cannabis store, you would still be obligated to issue a retail registration if a private business came to your township seeking a registration. This is one where it is probably, if you are interested in setting a retail registration cap, if you'd like to limit the number of cannabis stores in your jurisdiction, that you would want to work with your city attorney to determine what cap makes the most sense, the language to use to set the cap, and then also the appropriate mechanism to put that cap in order. The statute does require that the retail registration cap, I believe, be adopted. Believe by ordinance. But you'll want to make sure you're working with your legal department to do so. And then similarly, if you are a small city or town and you would like to delegate your authority to your county and your county is willing to be the retail register for cannabis stores, again, you'll want to work to get that done. So yeah, delegation. Like I just sort of noted, there's no defined method by which this delegation occurs. We at the office don't have any real, skin in the game about how that delegation occurs. That said, we would like to know if a city or township has decided to turn their sort of retail registration authority over to the county they're in. As Sophie noted, part of the process for a store to get up and running is that they have to provide us contact information for the local unit of government that's overseeing them. So it'll be helpful for us if we have an applicant who comes in and issues a township that we know has delegated. So there will be a requirement, and it's in the draft rules, which I know Sophie mentioned earlier. We have some provisions around local control and local government in there. And like I say, we'll need to know if you're doing that delegation. So similarly, publicly available, we do have a model ordinance. The model ordinance was developed in partnership with people from city and county government, as well as LMC and AMC. We also had some input from, I think, an association of city planners. What we tried to do was create a pretty flexible tool that identified areas where you would likely want to have regulation around cannabis, whether it's sales, whether it's use, whatever it may be, kind of catching all of those categories. There are some out of bounds areas that the legislature put around cannabis. So, for instance, you may not prohibit the possession, transportation of use, or the establishment of a cannabis business. But the legislature did give locals the ability to adopt reasonable time, place, manner restrictions on cannabis businesses. There's some baseline things that are in statute around, how close you might be able to have something located to a school, to a daycare, those sort of things. Our model ordinance, I think, relies sort of on some of those existing statutory distances. The other thing I would note is that each city and county, I have learned, often will measure things like distance in a different way, whether that's from the end point of the lot or the center point of the lot. So you just want to make sure that these sort of regulations are consistent. I would also say the model ordinance, it does have some information about zoning. Our recommendation is that cities and counties zone cannabis business similar to analog businesses that already exist, whether that's microbreweries, micro distilleries, for retail environments, things like liquor stores or other types of stores, and sort of treat cannabis businesses like other businesses without rewriting entirely new zoning categories based on cannabis. Right. So, as I noted, municipal cannabis stores are an option. It was a single line in the original bill. There's now more information based on this past session. The local units of government will be permitted to apply for a retail license. That will likely occur, as I think Sophie noted, are sort of timelines that we believe early 2025. We'll start to do general rounds of licensing, and municipal stores will sort of fit into that timeline and schedule. We won't count retail licenses issued to municipals as retail stores for the purposes of that cap Sophie showed earlier. There is no distinction in the application process between a municipal applicant and a private business applicant. As you will likely see, I think, in the draft rules, we've sort of tried to identify who at a municipal liquor store might, or a municipal cannabis store would be subject to some of the requirements like a background check or the true party of interest provisions. We are interested in feedback from municipals about sort of if you're interested in starting a municipal store, like what that application process looks like for you guys and who are the appropriate people to sort of treat as the equivalent to an owner or manager of a cannabis retail store. Mentioned earlier, but the municipal stores don't count towards the locals' retail registration cap. So if you institute a cap saying we're only going to have three retail cannabis stores in our jurisdiction, and you have a municipal store, you would still have to have or be obligated to issue 3 retail registrations to private businesses. All right. Local compliance checks. So this is one of the areas that changed between 2023 and 2024. This streamlines some of the oversight policies and processes. We no longer require locals to sort of be fully familiar with and completely up to date on OCM's rules, regulations, and statutes, and instead local government compliance checks will focus on age verification and compliance with local ordinances that govern, for instance, those time, place, and manner restrictions on cannabis businesses. The delegation of sort of registration is also a delegation of compliance checks. So depending on who's issuing registrations, that's also the entity that should be doing the compliance checks. We removed this past session additional compliance measures that were sort of given to cities and counties related to OCM statutes and rules and regulations. As I noted, this is an attempt to streamline the work of the locals and also ensure sort of everyone is enforcing the things they have the most knowledge and expertise on. We obviously won't be enforcing your local ordinances unless asked to. And so this is hopefully an easier, more efficient system for everyone. All right, current and future enforcement. So I will say at present, we don't have any licenses issued. We are in the process of issuing the first license pre-approvals. Early next year, we'll start to issue real licenses and people will be able to engage in cannabis activity. There are currently registrations for people to sell low potency hemp edibles, the hemp derived edibles that we see across the state in liquor stores and beauty salons and in grocery stores sometimes. We continue to have enforcement authority over those. The hemp derived team moved from the Department of Health to the Office of Cannabis Management on July 1 and are out in the field doing inspections. We're focused on improper hemp dry products that maybe have too many milligrams, or the sale of things like hemp flower or THCA flower, which is actually and often just actual cannabis. Um, Once we get licenses issued, we'll start to do a lot more inspection of manufacturing sites for these products as well as retail sites for these products. Um, Both today and in the future, the office is partnering a lot with local governments, city attorneys' offices, and occasionally police, where there are issues that are coming up of an entity or an organization or group um, trying to operate sort of under color of official business, but engaged in the illegal sale of cannabis. If you reach out to OCM, if you have questions or concerns about something that's occurring in your city, town, or county, we're always happy to work together to figure out a solution to those issues, and share with you kind of what authority we have, what levers we can pull to try to ensure that, if someone's selling products, they're safe, legal, and not harmful. And so we'll continue that partnership. As Sophie noted, we'll have a sort of streamlined, direct process for expedited complaints from local governments. And even now, we're sort of doing that, but without an official channel for it. So, like I say, if you have questions or concerns, you can always reach out to me or to Sophie, or any of our sort of OCM contacts. We have a general inbox that gets routed to the correct place if you sort of identify your concerns coming from a local unit of government. All right.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I would also just like to note before we begin our panel with Angie and Angie, that I am seeing just a couple hand-raised features. And unfortunately, with a webinar this big, we just can't do live questions. But I do want to reiterate our email address, cannabis.info@state.mn.us. So please, as Eric just noted, it's a general inbox, but it gets routed very quickly and appropriately. So please send in your follow-up questions if you have any, or other questions that are not related to the webinar to there as well. I would like to introduce our panelists, who we are super thankful to have partnered with. And I just have to say, I have, before starting this job, didn't know much about land use and zoning, and have just been very grateful and impressed with all of the local government staff that we have come to learn from, and all of the associations and partners. So want to thank Angie and Angie for joining us. And so I want to make sure that they are here, and maybe it's just me who's not seeing them. Okay. So Angie Berg is the Land Use Division Director in Stearns County, and Angie Wiese is the Director of Safety and Inspections in the City of St. Paul. And so we've invited both of them here today to talk about the processes and take that they have approached as both a city and a county into this space. And so we know that one size doesn't fit all as we think about our local partners across the state, and oftentimes you all know your systems, oftentimes all the times, you all know your systems better than we do from the state side. And so wanted to make sure we lift up some of the ongoing work at the local level. So we can start with our conversation with Angie. And so I'm going to start with Stearns County. So for Angie, this is a new industry to regulate, new processes to implement. As you worked on this at Stearns County, who did you engage with, both internally, externally, and anything else that you've sort of noted as you've begun to think about what cannabis industry in your county looks like?
Yes, good morning, Sophie. This is Angie Berg. Just a thumbs up that you can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So we first started internally talking to all of our various departments, such as public health, county attorney, county administration, sheriff, GIS, assessor, and we developed a team of people to review the law and determine what role each of us would play. Assessor provided guidance on how businesses would be taxed. Public health provided information on how they will continue their ongoing educational efforts. We worked with our GIS team to develop and analyze a map that would look at zoning districts, potential setbacks, and I think that will be shown just a bit later. A big part of this also is working with our county attorney's office. They did draft the public use ordinance and the moratorium that is in place through the end of 2024. And currently, we are in the process of drafting the registration ordinance and also the zoning ordinance. And so the attorney's office is working on drafting the registration ordinance and is providing support for our office to work on the zoning. Our sheriff has been involved in teaming up with the attorney on the registration ordinance. Our auditor's office has been part of the conversation. We're thinking of kind of modeling it off of the liquor license workflow. And also we do issue large gathering permits. And so we're kind of modeling that same process for the temporary cannabis events. We're also delegated by our Stearns County is delegated by MDH for food, beverage, and lodging ordinances and inspections. So we might use some of those staff as well to do certain inspections. And then obviously our elected officials, we started back in May having some general policy discussions and introducing them to the law and what the county's role would be. Externally, we worked with a lot of people probably on this call, AMC, MCPSA, which is the Minnesota Association of County Planning and Zoning Administrators. So that's all the zoning administrators throughout the state. And we really talked a lot about this, probably at every meeting we've had over the last year and a half. OCM did attend both our annual and semi-annual meeting to present information and answer questions that we all had. And we did look at some other states a bit, but just with the laws being the way they are a bit different, we didn't rely heavily on that. Lastly, we really worked on developing a timeline for the various milestones. Obviously, the public use ordinance moratorium, and now we're at the point of the Planning Commission review for the zoning ordinances. I think just the last note on this would be communication. We created a website and email subscription service for the public, cities, townships, anybody, so they could follow each step we've taken. Not only does that cut down on a lot of the phone calls that we get, it allows them to access the information anytime that they want. And the second to the last thing I'll say is that if we really looked internally in all of our departments, we found that there's a lot of existing areas that we can parallel to other processes and capitalize on that for the cannabis. So it seemed hard and scary at first, but once we really dug into it, I think we were able to find those parallels.
That's great. Thank you. And Angie from St. Paul as well. How did your team at the city approach this work in preparation of your proposed ordinances that some of the folks on this call may have seen in the news already?
Yeah, a lot of the same things Stearns County was looking at, but what I'll add is that this is really new, obviously. It's very new, and so people should expect changes, and I would dare to say even frequent changes as things get fine-tuned. Fortunately, Minnesota is not the first to implement recreational marijuana or cannabis use. So there are some other, a lot of lessons learned from other communities, and really encourage people to rely on those and to make some connections. But also just want to say, read the law. I know it might not be the most exciting read you've ever had, but it really, really makes a difference. And more than just the local section, there are things in the law that impact your local community. And if you are used to having a lot more influence and control over licensing in particular, it really behooves you to read the law and see where you can take action in the best interest of your community on those things that Sophie mentioned, the time, place, and manner. With that, also read these rules. There is a finite deadline on when you can make comment, August 30th. And you really should read the rules again, more than just the local section. There's a section, for instance, that says that certain folks have to comply with local odor laws. Well, maybe you don't have one. So yeah, that's a space where you might want to consider and to have a policy conversation on what is needed in your community. So really, really encourage reading the law and the rules and exercising your right to make comment on the rules. But also, we're just really interested in maintaining a balance between being business friendly and protecting our community. So that's our biggest interest, and that's our goal as we review different options related to zoning and registration.
Thank you, Angie, and I think Eric will appreciate the reminder of the rules and our comments that we're seeking right now, because yes, August 30th will come quick, especially when the weather is what the weather is right now, and we'd rather all be outside. Okay, so back to Stearns County. Angie, the cannabis law provides for zoning determinations at the local level that both of you just hinted at. How did you determine how you were approaching your zoning recommendations specifically?
So we looked at it based on really what the legislature gave us, right? So there's very few state laws that require counties and cities and townships to have certain land uses. And obviously there's some land uses that are required due to case law, but the overall concept is not new to local governments. So we did a lot of what Angie Wiese said at St. Paul is we kind of just dug into the rule. I created a spreadsheet to break it down, learn and analyze the various license types, and determine how it could fit, how each of those could fit into our existing zoning districts and our zoning performance standards. So we really just took the approach that it's like any other land use that might come our way. And what do we need to be concerned about? Parking, traffic, stormwater, how is it compatible? What setbacks do we want to have? And then we matched each of those license type with the existing zoning districts. And Stearns being a little bit different, obviously, than the city of St. Paul, agriculture, the dairy industry in particular is very important to Stearns County's economy. And, dairy production is #1 in the state. So we looked at really how is this different than any other egg operation impacts in terms of electric use, water use, transportation, all of those things. And so we also looked at our comprehensive plan and believe that it fits within the business pillar that talks about recognizing egg activities as a cornerstone, but also to adapt to changing markets, socioeconomic trends, and other egg practices. So that's where we're at. And then as shown on the screen, this is where our GIS team came in and helped us look at, this would assume we adopt an ordinance that has all the max setbacks as provided in state law. We haven't obviously made that decision yet, but this map will look a lot different than the city of St. Paul's. And so we just did this to analyze what we have. Here's like a little close up. So we have the parks, the daycares, very few residential facilities in the unincorporated areas. So those are primarily in the city of St. Cloud and Way Park. So you won't see that on these maps. So that's what we did with the mapping, and it's been helpful.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm going to bounce the same question to you, Angie, for St. Paul and how you approach this as well.
Need to unmute myself. You'll hear, some similar things to Stearns County. Planner's plan. So the reading the state law, I created a crosswalk because you'll see in the law a lot of references to other license types. It can get very confusing very quickly. And so creating a crosswalk on what license types were able to have endorsements or licenses of other types. Looked at existing uses, and similar to what sounds like Stearns did, decided that these are similar to a lot of different uses that we already have. So instead of creating a whole new cannabis section of the zoning code, figuring out what zoning districts the different license types most closely align to. Look at also kind of the distance requirements for other uses right now, like liquor, like tobacco. Looked at 29 other cities on what their zoning laws were, but also, as these maps show, looked at, and these are just for schools, daycares, and the park features, not from treatment centers and the other elements that we could separate from. On the left, it shows what the max distance allowed by the law would do in St. Paul. And the pink is, or purple, whatever it's showing up on your screen, really shows where the uses for retail could exist, and the blue are all the areas where it couldn't exist if we adopted max zoning. So I know that Eric had mentioned, the cap, or it's not even a cap, it's a minimum. And if you implemented a cap in your jurisdiction, that's one way to limit the number of licenses. But in effect, you also can't create a zoning standard that would limit the number of licenses just based on your zoning considerations. In other words, you zone it so restrictively that it's only allowed in a handful of locations. So on the left is with max distances, on the right is with a 300-foot. And as you can see pretty clearly, a lot more areas of the city open up to be able to have retail use. Also looked at the comprehensive plan, and again, seeing where this activity fits in, consulted with other planners, but mostly with Minneapolis. And we also mapped out the current registered edible locations that are available also on the website, on OCM's website. So if you are curious where existing ones are, that's a helpful tool. This map is about the cultivation and production manufacturing. So there are not the distance requirements in the law related to these, but you still should look at where cultivation and manufacturing align with either your existing zoning code, or if you need to make some changes. Our team also looked at 14 academic studies, looked at kind of what the implications are if these are still treated just as any other retail location, like a dollar store, and just don't forget about other zoning regulations like your lighting, any sort of parking standards, bike parking, design standards, setbacks, floor area coverage. Zoning is more than land use. So as far as determination on what type of land use it belongs in, and think about other types of locations where this might happen. Do you have higher ed in your community? Are they going to be doing some different activities related to studies and those types of things? And then just the cultivation, Stearns, it sounds like outdoor cultivation might be likely, but in St. Paul, outdoor cultivation is not likely. So, but now we have to consider what indoor cultivation looks like, and if there are things that we need to consider related to that for zoning.
Thank you both for that. That is super helpful. And I think Eric and I have continued to learn about those considerations too. And also why we have the approach of, not one size fits all for that very reason, Angie, about different parts of the state look a little bit different. And with these license types, there's quite a range of activity. So for Stearns County, Angie, as Eric noted, and talked about earlier, the cannabis law designates that local governments are responsible for local retail registration, and that a city or a township may delegate that registration authority to the county, then making them the entity responsible for that. So as a county, what are potential strategies you are hearing as you're talking with AMC and others about how to navigate this potential delegation process?
We can, the Minnesota Association of County and Planning and Zoning Administrators conducted a poll to all of our counties and received lots of responses related to this issue and the registration and where everyone was kind of at with it. There's varying levels of outreach currently throughout the state on this issue. Some counties have went so far as had meetings with cities and townships. Some have sent out letters, questionnaires. Others are kind of just waiting for, I think, this meeting to happen to see if there's any direction coming from OMC on this. And some, like Stearns, we're undecided yet on that issue. The responses from the counties that have kind of taken the next step in terms of how to have that delegation agreement, it's been in different forms. So, for example, local governments a lot of times use joint powers agreements or a memorandum of agreements or memorandums of understanding, resolutions. I think this is where you're going to want to definitely engage your legal counsel, and the city and the township would need to do the same to find out what sort of agreement do you want to have if you're taking on that delegation. And again, my understanding is the law is very broad, and I think Eric touched on that. It means that to memorialize the delegation is very open-ended, and it's really just negotiable. So there's, I think, some frustration on counties on that. You know, we don't like to be told what to do until we do. And so I think we're going to just need to work together on and sharing some of these things to get and see where this can take us with that registration.
I appreciate that, Angie. And yes, and as Eric noted, it is statute is not specific in that specific area. And so really from OCM, the guidance has been to have that early communication between cities and counties, and certainly with your own attorneys about how they are reading that statute and how you may do a delegation authority. Similar to, I think both Angie's have mentioned it so far, that these processes, well new related to cannabis, may exist for other industries, may exist in prior spaces. And so really taking a look with your attorneys and with your fellow city and surrounding county areas about what that looks like. And as the High School Musical quote never ends, like we're all in this together. And so I think, yes, just the more communication, the better, and earlier, the better too. As also, I think I appreciate Angie's note on things may continue to change and evolve too. And so staying nimble and in communication remains important. So for St. Paul, on this topic as well, with retail registrations, as Eric talked about quite a bit, there is that option to limit retail registrations within your jurisdiction, but it is not a requirement. So as St. Paul has been a bit farther along in this process, how are you tackling that option? How are you planning to handle that process for both how you're going to handle retail registration and zoning certification? So once OCM is ready to send you an application.
Yeah, so right now there's not a strong desire to cap the registrations in St. Paul, since there is a cap statewide. It would be kind of hard for us to even hit our max, I think, for the first 2 years. So we do have some, I would call it runway, to be able to evaluate that decision more thoughtfully. And during the zoning review process, some of those comments and concerns came up in that. So that it won't be handled in zoning, but it's a good starting point for us. I think communication between OCM and the local jurisdiction is going to be really, really important. And there's going to be a lot of questions, and some of those questions will be things that the local can answer. Some will have to be handled by OCM, and just making sure that everyone's on the same page will be very, very important. We have a business licensing team, so they can review, and they're very used to reviewing applications, but also doing age verifications. We do age verification compliance right now for tobacco licenses. And then our zoning administration will be reviewing the applications that we receive from OCM. And I know that's kind of in our next question, Sophie, but you know, that 30-day turnaround that is in the statute. There's also, and I know folks who have planning background on this know about 1599. So there's 1599, and you know, I think we were really hoping that the law would fall back on 1599. It doesn't. So there is this 30-day rule in there about giving the local jurisdiction providing feedback back to OCM related to zoning compliance within 30 days. And I think, you know, that's still more to iron out, because maybe the land use is okay, but if, for instance, there's an outdoor component that the business wants to have, and that outdoor component requires a conditional use permit, that, you know, essentially by law can't be completed within 30 days. So we're going to need more time for that piece of it, and it would be more like a partial approval. So really kind of ironing out those details and what type of what level of verification OCM is looking for so that they can continue to work with the business applicant.
Absolutely. And noting on that piece as well, that as we prepare for licensing and rules, which we know are we're headed towards an early 2025, so still have a little runway to continue ironing out these order of operation details. But we are planning to use the software and are using the Acela software system for our licensing structure. And so we'll be working with local partners on utilizing that software for application forwarding and also for local governments to be able to certify zoning compliance as required in statute, as Angie has noted, within a 30-day window. And so we're really working on too about how important early conversations are, because that when that clock is triggered is also dependent as applicants move through different parts of their process. And so really trying to make sure that in the scenarios that Angie is laying out, in which there's parts that need to continue to be working on past or in a longer than 30 days, that we have really clear communication about applicants working with local government partners to be able to secure those steps in a way that makes sense. So I know that that's an area we've been asked a lot about, and especially as we think about zoning certification within Acela, and I think we could spend a whole day on that. And so more to come as we get closer to early 2025 on what that looks like, but wanted to start forecasting that. That's how we're thinking about it, and we certainly are thinking about that all of these domino pieces have to fit together. So the more we can be in communication about what the parallel systems look like and the steps as required in statute. So we're making sure we do that first, but then making it work for any other factors. But really can't say enough too about how important early conversation is with prospective applicants and local governments, that even if you don't have an application in, but learning if you have a prospective business in a certain area, learning what that local jurisdiction's process is for things like conditional use permits or zoning determinations, or as they are having these very public meetings about what their zoning ordinances look like, getting a handle on what that does, because they'll be engaging in this work in real time too. So I know we're also at 11, so I appreciate those who have stuck around with us. We just have one more question, and I think it's an important one, so I don't want to skip it. So thanks for hanging on. And so we'll do one more question for both our Angies on engagement. So in Stearns County, as we continue to roll out the whole process and we get closer to licensing businesses, and I sort of just talked about the importance of it, but how are you preparing, or already are, engaging with potential applicants and licensees?
So far we've had very few inquiries. Mostly the inquiries have been about cultivation. And in terms of what are we doing to, keep this up on everyone's radar, is we keep updating our website with the latest information, continue to educate our departments, create some draft workflows for registration. And again, just like any other potential applicant for maybe a feedlot or solar project, we'll finalize the ordinances, create the workflows, applications, process, and continue to engage with our partners at the state, such as OMC, MCPISA, AMC, basically to get ready to implement.
That's great. Thank you. And for St. Paul, engagement work I know has been going on for some time, as you noted earlier in your review of other cities and other states, of academic journals and other public meetings. What has been your approach to it so far, both with regards to how you've engaged in the process, but also as you think about prospective applicants and licensees specifically?
Yeah, our Planning and Economic Development Department has an economic development team, and they are keeping a list of businesses, contractors, and technical assistance providers that have experience with in the cannabis space. We've created a website and a separate email address to engage potential business owners, especially those who are trying to secure real estate prior to getting a license. There's a lot of steps that have to happen before you even attempt, which I appreciate the pre-license process or pre-approval process that has been implemented. So, and also in the zoning piece, where our approach of limited cultivation and production being allowed in mixed use and commercial districts have really amped up the interest in the vertically integrated businesses that want to locate in St. Paul. The economic development team also attended an expo that was held in Mankato and exchanged a lot of contact information with as many applicants as possible. And they've also met with Excel and compiled a list of energy rebate resources and plan to refer businesses to those should they become necessary. I also say we have a small business newsletter, and that will be, that's for all types of businesses, but I'm sure that we'll be communicating more and more about cannabis related items in the small business newsletter.
Thank you. And yes, for those that are having conversations with prospective applicants and licensees, just as Angie noted, folks coming out the other side of this license pre-approval process will have that piece of paper in hand that says OCM has done the vetting, they have passed background check, they have been selected in the lottery for this, they are on a pathway towards licensure that is supposed to be that designed that way in that order, so that you know who is a qualified applicant and also moving in that pathway versus someone at a different stage who maybe is just interested, has not yet filled out application, has not yet been vetted by OCM. So I want to note that as continue to watch as we issue license pre-approvals, because that will give lots of local jurisdictions more informed information about who may be come knocking and able to work together in that way as we wait for rules ever so patiently and very excitedly that we work out these very important processes too. And then as we have rules and we work on that, there will continue to be applicants knocking on the door, and we'll have a similar piece of paper called preliminary approval that also indicates some initial vetting. They've been selected for pathway to licensure, and that is intended to provide really informed information for our local partners as they work on this. So we are just a tiny bit over, and I'm going to take it, but I can't thank Angie and Angie enough, and for also for sharing their expertise here and also in giving us their time and extra time. So I'll repeat it again, but if you have questions, cannabis.info@state.mn.us, and also all of the associations that we've listed so far and have not listed, they are also sending us in constant communication with us. So if you send your questions to AMC or LMC, they can get here too. So please don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you all for attending.